What is up? Welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot. We are getting closer and closer to redraft season with every passing day, but I didn't want to just throw Dynasty away. So I wanted to do one last Dynasty startup mock, and I figure let's go ahead and make it a Superflex. Let's go ahead and make it a tight end premium. And if we're going to talk Dynasty, I wanted to have one of my favorite people from the Dynasty community, honestly, one of my favorite people from the fantasy community. Marvin Elequin is on the show with us from the Fantasy Footballers. The draft room is full. Everybody's ready. Let's get this thing started. What is up? Welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse, back at it this week after a long European vacation. Austin Amandolia, welcome back, my friend.
Yeah, glad to be back. And it's perfect. We get a Dynasty draft on the way back. I feel like this show has helped me get better at my Dynasty startup drafts. I have to admit, though, I need a new startup at some point in the near future to actually test out if I am indeed better, because that's the true test, is when you then get the projections and then you see, do you finish third or last in your first year?
What's funny is the ebbs and flows, because 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we started the show, I was doing a lot of startups. So but you weren't my permanent co-host at that point. And then 2 years ago when you came on, let me make sure I get this right. All I know is last year we did a lot of Dynasty startups. And so like this year, it feels like there haven't been any. So it's a very excellent point. The other concern I had was the last time I did a Dynasty startup, I don't think, or maybe you were all here with me, Austin. But I couldn't get the room filled. But you bring celebrities on the show and all of a sudden people want to draft with you. Our good friend, Marvin Elequin, someone who I was happy to share a bunch of your articles when we were doing our rookie research, when we were doing all of our threads. You're always out here in these rookie streets, and we are glad to have you here for this Dynasty startup. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Oh, I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. This should be super fun. And similar to you, Austin, it's been a while since I've actually been in a startup for a Dynasty League. I've been in 3 Dynasty Leagues for a while, and I haven't been in a startup in a while, but I've been itching to get into one. And so this kind of fills my itch for now. So I'm excited. This should be great.
There you go. Let me go ahead and get the draft up on the screen before I read all the housekeeping stuff that I have to warn people about. So give me a second here, guys. We'll get that up. So as you can see, I did a 10-team startup, and that is fully because I was worried that it wasn't going to fill. I even told Austin and Marvin that as I was getting it filled up. But as these guys mentioned, it's going to scratch some itches. Everybody's been doing rookie drafts lately, and I'm like, well, you know where rookies also matter? Is Dynasty startups. They matter even more. And normally you'd have to worry about rookie picks and everything, but now that they have landing spots, we're just going to go ahead and take them in this draft. If you guys have never tuned into an episode of Mock It Like It's Hot before, we are not going to grade every team. We are not going to talk about every pick. The draft largely goes on in the background. Once we start seeing some picks get made that are interesting, I'll throw those up on the screen. We'll talk more about those, but the draft is kind of just the guide for these guys to talk to you guys about how you handle startup drafts and all of that fun stuff. I'm going to go ahead and start the draft, guys. So I always like to mention our drafters. So while I go ahead and get that draft started, we have Josh Hudson, founder of Club Fantasy, picking from the 1s. P. Burns at the 2. Marvin took the 3. Adumbi at the 4. Big Game James at the 5, Jay Reed at the 6, Smitty at the 7, Austin took the 8, Duarte at the 9, and Brocal has the 10. This is a super flex draft, so you're seeing quarterbacks go off the board. Before I have you guys talk a little bit about tight end premium, I do want to mention a couple of quick things for here at Club Fantasy. First and foremost, we have a Discord. If you guys are looking to get first invites to these drafts or somewhere to bounce trade ideas or talk best ball, we have all of that going on at the Club Fantasy Discord. You will find the link in the description of this video. And as I mentioned, it's the first person who gets an invite to this draft. And we don't even just talk football. Austin started a little fantasy baseball community there. We have a lot of stuff going on for all of the different sports. If you guys are looking just to be around a group of cool, like-minded people, no drama, check out the Club Fantasy Discord, link in the description. And also, if you're looking to get better at Dynasty, we always like to mention our partnership with Dynasty Nerds. You can get 15% off if you use promo code Club Fantasy over at Dynasty Nerds. Get access to all of their Dynasty-focused ADP, Dynasty-focused articles. They have the Nerd Film Room where you can get all the film on these rookies before they play a game in the NFL, and you can kind of learn everything you need to learn about these guys. But first, I want to talk about the draft settings here. So I went Superflex. I went tight end premium. I went third round reversal. But what I wanted to focus on to get this whole thing started, Marvin, I know Austin's thoughts on tight end premium. I'll be interested to see how you feel about it. But how much in a dynasty startup, a 10-team dynasty startup, does a draft being tight end premium affect your draft strategy going in?
Yeah, definitely. What pulls them up the draft board pretty significantly. And I'm trying to call back to an article that Matt DeSorbo, who used to write for the Fantasy Footballers, wrote about wins above replacement, and he focused on tight end premium in one of them. And when he adjusted them, we obviously know in Superflex quarterbacks are super valuable, wide receivers, running backs, especially running backs, because of the scarcity, they move up the boards. But tight end premium actually moves them up when you look at wins above replacement, up with some of the top wide receivers and running backs in even PPR scoring. And so it actually makes it a little more exciting. I'm in one tight end premium league, and it's just really fun when you actually have to think about who's that next sleeper tight end that could emerge. I remember Tucker Kraft was that for this past year. It's like finding those gems just makes it a little more of an exciting experience in dynasty leagues.
I want to quickly throw Jamie up on the screen. I never know people's sleeper names, but it's Jamie Pirog. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Jamie. I got to get you on the show so we can clear that up. But he's with Going for Two in Fantasy Six Pack, picking from the 5 spot. So hey, I'm glad I cleared that up there. Now, Austin, we do know that in a typical tight end premium, that will drag tight ends up the board, and I have my thoughts about that. But you have just larger thoughts about tight end premium in general. So I'm going to let you go off. I think this might be your first sandbox moment of the 2025 or soapbox moment of the 2025 season, because I try to give you one of these every season. So
yeah, for sure. Well, for me, I have been an advocate in the past of just basically eliminating the tight end position, because most of the time I don't really want to play tight ends, because if you don't have like the top 3 guys, then you end up scraping the bottom of the barrel. And my big thing is, if at the end of the day, do I want to play someone like, I don't know, Jake Ferguson in my lineup, or would I rather pick like somebody in the wide receiver 3 range, like Terry McLaurin is maybe a good idea there. Like he could be your third receiver as opposed to having to start a tight end. So I love the wide receiver tight end flex position, having a receiver flex. And so that you can still, like folks who like the tight ends and want to pay up for guys like Brock Bowers, the former Travis Kelce's of the world, they still can, but then those that, don't want to have to stream random tight ends get to put a receiver in that spot. But in terms of tight end premium itself, I mean, I think that it's an interesting solution to the tight end problem that we often face. But Ryan, we've talked about in the past, what it really ends up doing in practice more often than not is exacerbating the difference between the top end of the tight end in fantasy and the mid and bottom tier. So it definitely makes me want to get a tight end early, even more so, which you'll see is what I did in this draft. But I wouldn't say it's the solution to the disparity in the tight end position.
And that has been my take. And it's Austin and I have been doing shows together for 3 years. It's no surprise that we're in lockstep here. Is the one thing I always caution folks about tight end premium is it doesn't do what 99% of people think it does. And that is, it makes tight ends more relevant. It doesn't quite do that. It creates a larger gap of the haves and the have-nots when it comes to guys like Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, who are the only tight ends who are going to catch 100 balls this season. Well, when they're getting 1.5 PPR versus 1 PPR for everyone else, that just makes them even better than they were already going to be, which I'm fine with. I am a person who, like Calvin, I'm going to put your comment up here in a second, keep tight ends in the game. Me and Austin have kind of went back and forth on that. I see the merits of his idea, but I want to keep tight ends in the game as well. But what tight end premium is supposed to fit, and this is where, in my opinion, it matters the most, is it's going to make tight ends flex worthy. So you need to make sure in your league you have enough flexes that people are going to even consider flexing a tight end. In this league, putting it bluntly, I kind of shoestrung tight end premium into this league at the request of P. Burns, who's drafting with us. There is no ADP in sleeper for a mock draft for tight end premium, and I only put 2 flexes in here. Marvin, I just don't know, in a 10-team league with 3 wide receiver spots and 2 flexes, I still don't know if 1.5 tight end premium would be enough to make some of the tight end 20s flex worthy But then if you make it any higher premium, which we've seen leagues going to 2 and 2.5 now, guys like Brock Bowers and Trey McBride become the most valuable assets in all of fantasy football, Marvin. So that's always been my concern with tight end premium, and my concern with a lot of scoring changes is making sure you're striking a balance where you're not creating godlike creatures.
Yeah, 100%. And to your point, it really just widens the gap, because we know after the top 5, top 6 or so, it tapers off pretty quickly at the tight end position. And all you're doing is just making Bowers and McBride and some of those other guys. You could probably talk about one or two more that really move up the draft boards. One thing I've seen recently, I don't know if you guys have been in any of these types of leagues, but 2 tight ends to start 2 tight ends.
Oh my goodness.
With a tight end premium makes it just a little crazier. That's the one league that I have that's tight end premium. And to your point, you actually have to care about Ben Sano and some of these other guys, because you might have to start him, right? And so to your point, though, I think you do want a couple of flexes. I do think in this format, I would, because of the 1.5, I'd probably draft one more depending on how the board falls. But at some point, you get to some tight ends who are just going to be volatile, to say the least. And at that point, it's just better to wait.
Yeah, I love that. And I think another thing you can do to remedy it, we saw Scott Fish utilize this very well 2 years ago, but then he went away from it. Make it where some bad quarterbacks don't belong in that super flex spot. Because if you can make it where, like, you don't want to start a guy who's going to throw, 15 interceptions because of how bad they get penalized for those interceptions, like Scott did when he made it -4 a few years ago. I feel like if you can make quarterbacks less valuable while increasing the value of some of those tight ends, but 2 tight ends just sounds crazy to me. Before we move on, and we're going to move on, I have a hard pivot from where this conversation is going. We are going to come back to the tight ends at the end of the draft. I wanted to get both of your opinions on this. And Austin, I don't know that you and I have even talked about this a lot in these last 3 years, but Calvin is one who says, if it's in the game, keep it in the game. Keep tight ends, keep kickers. And I have been an advocate, Marvin, of keep kickers, keep team defense, though I'd also love IDP. I am one who is I've never really thought about it. If it's in the game, keep it in the game. Are you a anti-kicker person, Marvin?
Yes.
It's okay to be, I was going to say, it's okay to be wrong. No, I'm joking. But no, honestly, I totally get why people don't like it, because it can be very much a coin flip. So
no, yeah, and that's exactly it. I think it's fun to have another element of that you have to plan for, and kickers just add that. But I do think kicker, in my opinion, is one of the most volatile positions in fantasy football. That it's hard to predict sometimes, and so that's where I prefer to not have them in my league. I am in one that does have kicker and still defense, and that's very much like I feel like that's still the original format in my head. And so it is fun. It adds another element, but I must say I enjoy the non-kicker leagues just a little more.
Now, Austin, I will say my love of kickers and defense ends with Dynasty. I do not enjoy Dynasty that has kickers or defense, to be perfectly honest. Defense and Dynasty, and I have 3, I think, that have it, is so strange to me, because I'm holding this team perpetually, but their players are changing all of the time. And like a defense that was good 2 years ago isn't good anymore. And it's just strange to me to have defense in Dynasty. But Austin, your take on that?
Yeah, I definitely, in Dynasty, I do not like defense. I sort of get it for kicker, but I'm like with Marv with this. I'm not really excited about having kickers in any of my leagues, but in particularly in a Dynasty league, in part because of the volatility, but in part too, it depends on the scoring. If you leave kickers at standard scoring, then I particularly don't like them in leagues, because for the longest time, and I think it's still this way, standard scoring, kickers don't lose a point for missing an extra point, which is the most bonkers thing.
Flat out standard scoring, they do not. In any league you're in with me, they lose that point.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's been one of my biggest pushes when I do have to play with kickers, is like, okay, let's at least penalize them for missing extra points. And then I'm a fan of doing some interesting things with the kicking scoring to make them more relevant. But overall, I'm okay with leaving the kickers out of it.
Jamie just can't resist repping the brand. He said no kickers, going for 2.com. So I see where Jamie's going with that. Guys, I'm going to make a hard pivot here because there's a player I want to talk about. I've been doing a lot of shows. Austin's been off for 3 weeks, hasn't had to really deal with any of this. I've been doing a lot of shows lately, and our last week on no pun intended was our IDP special. Travis Hunter is the new darling of IDP, a rookie coming into the league. I've been equating him to Shohei Ohtani because he plays both sides. When it was announced that the Jaguars were going to play him on offense and defense, Austin, every Dynasty analyst, every IDP analyst I knew said he is now the 101 of rookie drafts. He goes as the 5-2 in this draft, and if I saw it correctly, it was an auto pick. I don't know if Duarte had him in the queue, and that's where the auto pick came from. But I guess my question to you is, how are you looking at Travis Hunter in a league that has no IDP implications? He is just a receiver. It doesn't matter what he does on defense.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough one because the projection systems are already up and in Sleeper, and they have him like looking better than some of the guys that are clear like wide receiver 2 staples. Like per Sleeper's projections, he's projected to perform better than T. Higgins this year, which for me is a little bit warm for my blood. It feels a lot, especially given the nature of the Cincinnati Bengals offense compared to the Jacksonville Jaguars one of last year. I think I am very comfortable with him being like in the wide receiver 2 range. I think that feels totally fine to me. I don't know that he is immediately jumps into like a top 10, top 12 receiver for me without the IDP aspect to his game. But having him as my second receiver, I feel pretty comfortable with that, especially if I'm looking to do a build where I am in a startup and like trying to kind of play young and have like that 3-year trajectory. Now, if I'm in a win now, like I'm just doing the startup and want to win year 1, I might pass on him for more established guys just because in some ways I want to see it to believe it.
There's that.
For this type of league. For IDP, I don't need to see it to believe it, but for the non-IDP, I kind of do want to see it. So I might hold off on those leagues where I'm trying to win year 1.
Now, Marvin, I know from my time with the Ballers, you guys don't do a ton or any really IDP. If I remember correctly, Mike was very much against IDP for a long time there. Yeah. Did you get a chance to just look at Travis Hunter from an offensive standpoint? I don't remember if you had an article about him or not.
Yeah, he's in my wide receiver model where I just plug all these players in and see what it spits out, right? So it looks at production, draft capital efficiency from college and tries to project them out. And he surprisingly, even though he played, part-time cornerback, obviously, and wasn't a full-time wide receiver, or full-time cornerback, I should say, part-time wide receiver. And then that obviously changed towards the end of his career. He was still in the 88th, 89th percentile among all drafted wide receivers. And now imagine had he played wide receiver full-time since his true freshman season, he'd be up there probably with Ted McMillan, who for me is my wide receiver 1. The reason I still hesitate a little bit with Travis Hunter is because, Austin, to your point, that Jacksonville offense, there's a lot of uncertainty there, and it's still Trevor Lawrence at quarterback who's struggled a little bit in recent years. Now that could change here with the new coaching staff, with another weapon, but Brian Thomas is still there, and he was just really efficient last year. Garnered targets at a really elite rate. And so part of me still hesitates a little bit to believe that he'll be a consistent wide receiver too. I'd much rather in a build have him as my flex because I do think he'll have those week winning matchups and he'll win you a week with some long touchdowns. I truly believe it. Yeah. But I'd rather not have to bank on him as my wide receiver 2 to start off and just wait to see how the targets kind of distribute in that new offense.
I'm going to throw one more thing out that you guys didn't mention. I initially had Travis Hunter as my wide receiver 5 in this draft class and moved him up to 3. I loved Luther Burden this whole process. I don't love him so much that he's now in Chicago, but regardless, moved him up to 3, couldn't get him past Burden. But I remember my mindset of why I was worried, and it still sticks. Him being on the field this much is just increasing his injury risk to a percentage we've never seen in the NFL before. And the other part is he's a willing tackler at corner. This is a guy who's going to get his nose and his neck and his concussion in there. And that terrifies me for the games that he could then end up missing as my wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. I'm not going to go into any dynasty draft avoiding Travis Hunter. I'm with Austin. I want to see it happen. Where he went in this round, our draft, round 5, I'm not mad at that at all. But I kind of agree with you, Marvin. I would much rather have him as my flex. I better have some really damn good wide receivers before I pull the trigger on Travis Hunter.
Yeah. Well, and to your point too, like Travis Hunter going at in the 5th round, that's totally fine here. But if you're looking at the context of how this draft fell, and if other drafts fall the same way, like I just got Emeka Egbuka in the 7th round. I got him 2 rounds later, and Egbuka was the 2nd receiver off the board in the NFL draft. If you're not counting, if you're not counting Travis Hunter in that mix,
Yeah.
if you are, then he was the 3rd. But going to Tampa Bay, like that's a really good setup for Egbuka in an offense where he has Mike Evans, who is going to be getting close to retirement. Chris Godwin coming off of an injury. Like Egbuka is immediately going to be at least the wide receiver 3, and he's going to have a clear pathway to wide receiver 2-1 in the coming years. So I kind of like the value there compared to Hunter. So it's a little bit of like, what is the trade-off there of what you're getting to?
Jamie says he saw that in practice. Emeka Egbuka getting sniped on the Olave pick and everything that went on there. As I mentioned, we are not going to cover every pick of the draft, but one thing I like to say on screen for anybody, or say out loud for anybody who may not be watching the show and just listening to the show, I like to go over the first 3 rounds and talk about some of the interesting picks that happened in these first 3 rounds, guys. So I'm going to just recap the first 3 rounds. Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. It's a super flex draft. Quarterbacks go off the board early. Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Justin Jefferson, Brock Bowers, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson. And then it is a 3rd round reversal. So in the 2nd round, the person who took Bijan Robinson also grabs Ashton Genty. Obviously, they are all in on their running backs. Malik Neighbors, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, CeeDee Lamb, Trey McBride, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas. And then it goes back to the guy who doubled up on running backs. He was also able to grab Lad McConkey. And then we got Saquon Barkley, Caleb Williams, Bucky Irving, Drake London, Drake May, CJ Stroud, Omarion Hampton. Marvin, we're going to talk about Omarion Hampton at the end of the draft. Garrett Wilson and Bo Nix rounds out. I always like to throw the 4th pick in there, the first pick of the 4th round. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. by the person who grabbed Bo Nix. The first thing I wanted to ask you guys, are there any picks that stood out to you? And obviously the Omarion Hampton pick stands out to me. In a dynasty, it's not that bad. I'm having trouble ranking him in redraft right now. Whenever I submit my redraft rankings, I get yelled at that I have Omarion Hampton way lower than the consensus. I just don't know how to read that backfield. Austin, you just went to auto. Okay, you fixed it already. But I'll start with you, Austin. Looking at these picks, other than you and Marvin's picks, because we're going to talk about those at the end of the draft. Anything stand out to you here? Nothing seems all that weird to me. What do we have? 7, 10 quarterbacks, 11 quarterbacks go in the first 3 rounds. That seems pretty right for a Superflex draft.
It does. The thing that actually stood out to me was the very first pick at the draft, which was Josh taking Jaden Daniels at the 101, which I mean, I respect. Like Jaden Daniels had an incredible rookie season. Now, I don't know that I'm taking Jaden Daniels at the 101 right now. I think I currently have Lamar Jackson as my Dynasty 101 in the Superflex league, followed immediately by Josh Allen, simply because I am a little bit cautious after the CJ Stroud experience of last year, where CJ Stroud had that incredible rookie year. And we just assume like, oh, it's going to keep getting better. He's going to keep improving from there. Well, we saw with CJ Stroud, it wasn't necessarily the case. Development isn't always linear. And so that was just something that is something that stuck in my mind. Now, I still think I'm taking Jaden Daniels as a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm not dropping him down that far, but the 101 is a little bit hefty for me.
Josh has filled in for you the last couple weeks on the show and did a startup last week where Jaden Daniels was the 101. So I think it's fresh in his brain right now. And Josh is actually commenting from the Club Fantasy account that Stroud doesn't run, Daniels does. So there's nothing to be worried about there. So
that's how regression works.
Hey, I was gonna say, Marvin, if you want to go in on Jaden Daniels, but any other picks that stand out for you in those first 3 rounds as well. So
I mean, I was hoping Daniels would fall to me at 103, but I'll take Josh Allen. That's not a bad
what a consolation prize.
I know, exactly. The one that stands out to me is Garrett Wilson, and not that where his ADP is anything out of the ordinary, but it's just interesting to see how far he's dropped over the last couple of years. And I think coming in, everyone had him as the wide receiver one, rightfully so. Quarterback issues happened, then we had Aaron Rodgers in, now he's gone. And there's a lot of uncertainty with that offense. And so he's actually down quite a bit compared to the last couple of years. And I think that's actually a pretty good value because he's still one of the more talented receivers in the league. And so I think we might be undervaluing him in redraft and even in Dynasty. I do think Fields is not as bad as a quarterback as some of us might, or I personally still remember from the Chicago days. And so I do think there's an opportunity where he's one of the better values in Dynasty and redraft this year.
I'm going to throw Josh up on the screen real quick here before I get to my keep trade cut question. Josh says, plus it's a mock draft, so he can't trade. Daniels was never going to make it back to him at 210. I always point this out. If any of you are new to Dynasty mocks, I'm going to uncover my co-host faces here. If any of you are new to Dynasty mocks, one thing that does, or Dynasty startups, one thing that does not happen in a mock draft that happens incessantly through a startup draft is pick trading. You will see people packaging rookie picks to move up in the draft, packaging middle picks to move up and down, a ton of wild trades. Dynasty startups are not for the trade adverse because it happens so much. Great point made by Josh there. Guys, for my keep trade cut, I knew I wanted to tie it into wide receivers. I hadn't really done a wide receiver keep trade cut for the last few weeks. And I wanted to do it so someone early in the show. And I always try to come up with a theme. And this theme kind of came up with itself. And it worked out for the ADP as well, because they happen to be the first 3 wide receivers taken. Marvin, you know how keep trade cut works. I always make Austin go first. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Malik Neighbors, the LSU wide receivers. Austin, I'm going to make you say you want to cut one of these guys, but go ahead and explain your answer, why you want to keep the one, why you want to trade the one, because I feel like a lot of times when you're early on in a draft, these guys in the first round who were willing to go wide receiver, they had to make that decision. So I think this is an interesting question about Neighbors is obviously the younger one, but the more proven guys are the more proven guys. So Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors, LSU wide receivers, keep trade cut, Austin.
Oh boy. You've gotten better at these since I was on vacation.
Yeah, I was gonna say the last one before your vacation was just boring. I remember that. So.
Wow, this one's really interesting. Also, just like the quarterback situations, I feel play such a big role here. So yeah. I think team context would definitely matter here. I would just throw that out because I have been known to trade Justin Jefferson in the past for many picks, which has been very nice for reload in my team. But I think I'm gonna go keep Justin Jefferson because it still is stuck in my brain that he's the best receiver in the league, and it is really hard for me to trade him. I will trade Jamar Chase and I will cut Malik Neighbors. And the reason being, I just don't trust the quarterback situation in New York. I am a little nervous about the quarterback situation in Minnesota, but I've seen Justin Jefferson overcome it enough, especially with, Kirko Chains there for many years, that I don't feel as concerned about that. And then Jamar Chase, I mean, he has one of the best quarterbacks in the league, so not concerned about that at all. So I guess I would trade him, but Justin Jefferson, he's just so good. I'll keep him.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Marvin, would you do it any differently?
Man, this is when you were talking about this before the show and saying this is an impossible situation. This is definitely an impossible situation. I don't know how to even start this, but I think to me, the first one that came to my head was Jamar Chase being a keep, because there's just, I think, less uncertainty there, where we know he was high usage last year. I don't know if that's that probably will not change this year. I don't see it changing. And he's got one of the best quarterbacks throwing to him. We know that for a fact. Now you get to Malik Neighbors and Justin Jefferson. Man, quarterback uncertainty for both. Maybe just to shake things up, I think I would trade. Oh gosh, I would trade Malik Neighbors because I think there's a lot of hype with him just because of the volume. I think he'll get a ridiculous amount of volume this year.
Yeah.
So Gosh, yeah, let's trade him and cut Justin Jefferson. In reality, you'd be lucky to have any of these three.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just so hard to really like nitpick the small things about their situations because in reality, I think, Austin, to your point, Justin Jefferson can overcome any quarterback. I think Malik Neighbors is right there as well. And one thing to keep in mind too is Malik Neighbors was wide receiver 1 in expected fantasy points last year. Like his volume was ridiculous, and that's not going to change this year. I don't think. I think regardless of quarterback, he's going to be peppered with targets. So that's my kind of cop out answer for this one.
No, interestingly enough, you agree exactly with how Josh gave the answer. Keep Chase, trade Neighbors.
Oh, there we go, Josh.
JJ.
I love it.
Well, and not to even pile on, but I think that's how I was going to go with it as well. I feel like, Austin, you took advantage of trading JJ when the time was right. I think when we're looking at these three guys, he probably has the worst trade value, but there's no way I'm moving on from Jamar Chase as long as Joe Burrow exists on this planet. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase are in lockstep. That dude is going to average 18 yards a catch for the rest of his career, it seems. So I'm probably keeping Chase. I'm probably trading Neighbors. Cutting JJ is tough, but I think you both brought up a very interesting point. Austin, you went into it right away where Neighbors' quarterback situation, I remember during our draft show 2 years ago, that was the first thing that got brought up is like, what are we going to do about Neighbors? And you were the voice of reason on that show. And you're like, look, Daniel Jones ain't going to be the quarterback forever, guys. Don't be too worried about Malik Neighbors. But now we're kind of dealing with the exact same situation with Minnesota because we know nothing about JJ McCarthy. We know the kid's a national champion, but we also know he didn't have to throw the ball. So I'm just nervous about what's going to happen there. But I do agree with both of you. These guys are quarterback proof. And that's something like Marvin said, if you're lucky enough to be in this position, that this is the choice you're making.
Don't make the choice.
Keep them all.
Keep
exactly.
all three. Yeah, keep all three. Do not trade. This is how you set your organization up for the rest of your life. There were a couple of picks called out in the chat that I wanted to bring up. Jamie brings up that Mike Evans went over Tyreek Hill. I haven't had a chance to dig into the ADP for either one of these guys. I know, where did Evans go? I remember saying his name.
The pick before Tyreek Hill, the 9.6, and then Hill goes the 9.7.
Oh, God, it was that far down. I didn't even realize that. Okay. So we got Mike Evans at 9.6 and Tyreek Hill at 9.7. I just realized, is Jamie calling himself out? He made that pick. So, how do you guys feel about that? Because I know Tyreek Hill is kind of a lightning rod right now. And if you guys don't want to get into any of the off the field stuff, I totally get it. But Tyreek Hill 3 years ago said that he was retiring at the end of this contract. Now he gets a little bit more issues going on. No charges were filed. We don't need to get too much into it, but Tyreek Hill has some off the field issues going on that are constantly putting him at jeopardy. Mike Evans feels like he's a day away from retirement. Like the second he ends the season with 999 yards, I think Mike Evans is done. So Marvin, when you're dealing with these older wide receivers that have baggage or not, Mike Evans has no baggage. Let me be very clear. His baggage is his age. Is it worth taking Evans to, I was going to say to win this season, but does Evans help you win this season better than Tyreek Hill?
Oh man, I do think so. I think there's just a little less uncertainty with Mike Evans in this situation. Now Egbuka joins that team, but I still think Mike Evans is the wide receiver one as long as he's there. And when you look at their usage last year, very similar. Evans actually had the higher target share, air yard share, very similar across both of them. And they're just, that's just how it is for alpha wide receivers. But yeah, I agree. It's hard to talk about Tyreek without talking about the off-field stuff. And so you just have to take that into account. And I just rather have the more stable offense and more stable situation in Evans.
Austin, just those guys.
Yeah, I think I am comfortable with Evans over Hill for very similar reasons. I mean, I think there's a low chance that the off-field stuff ends up impacting Hill this year in terms of games missed, just because of the way the NFL tends to handle these things.
Yeah.
But I do think the overall just vibe around Tyreek Hill is off, not just because of the off-field stuff, but because after the end of the season last year, during the last game, he was in the locker room saying he didn't want to be in Miami anymore. Yep. So like, it seems like the vibes are off with the team. I think this is a this is a coaching staff that's also in a very like desperate situation. I think they could be a little bit on the hot seat this year, and so this team in general could go south this year. Whereas vibes in Tampa Bay feel really good, and I feel like Mike Evans, like he has shown such stability. Like the cliff is probably going to come quickly for him, but at this point too, like you're getting him. The team that took him as their wide receiver 3, and so I don't mind that at all. Like having him as the wide receiver 3, and if he hits the cliff this year, well, there's other options that can actually fill in pretty well. So I think I'm totally comfortable with that. I am fine with taking the splash on Tyreek Hill. That was the wide receiver 4 on that team, and I mean that's still pretty nice for the upside there. But I'm not mad at Evans over Hill.
Yeah, if we're talking vibe check, Mike Evans is gonna pass the vibe check over Tyreek Hill every day of the week and twice on Sunday. There is no denying that. Steven kind of backed off of his question, but I'm not gonna lie, it hit me a little bit when I was saying those first 3 rounds. The world seems to have turned a bit on AJ Brown. So AJ Brown falls to the 4th round, and I don't disagree with a few of the guys who went ahead of him, but Marvin, you brought up Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison, JSN, even our guy TEP McMillan going ahead of AJ Brown, tied to Jalen Hurts. And I understand there's target competition, but AJ Brown, if I remember correctly, is 27 years old and is playing with one of the best quarterbacks in football. Are we getting a little too caught up on 27 here and just grabbing these younger guys, Marvin? It seems strange to me for AJ Brown to fall that far in terms of the entire wide receiver pool.
Yeah, I might have to take that back. Wilson is not the best value, or may not be the best value. It might actually be AJ Brown. I did not see him fall into the 4th round, and that I agree. I think that's just kind of that's what happens in Dynasty. I think we get all excited about the rookies and they move up the draft board, but AJ Brown still accounted for 34% of the team's targets last year, just absolutely elite, 50% of their air yards. I mean, he's still the wide receiver 1. And we've seen this historically, that wide receivers that are elite early in their careers, and that's the case for AJ Brown, they tend to be elite well into their early 30s, like 32 is around when the cliff happens for wide receivers, a little later than running backs. And so he's 27. I think he's turning 28. I mean, if you draft him here, you will still have him for at least 3 more seasons or so at high level play, in my opinion. And for me, at least in Dynasty, that's how I look at it. It's like the next 2 to 3 years. At that point, I don't see AJ Brown really dropping in production. Now, Dynasty value will probably drop because he will get older, but from a production standpoint, he's one of the best, in my opinion, trade targets right now in Dynasty leagues for contenders because of the hype on the rookies and the kind of the aversion to older wide receivers.
And I can speak to that in practice. In a Dynasty league, traded for AJ Brown during the draft for what I thought was absolute peanuts. I guess it wasn't peanuts. I'll say the trade. I just remembered what the trade was. I had the 102. I did everything in my power to trade up to the 101 to get Genty. I needed a running back. I don't trust Hampton in year 1, and I'm going to win a championship in year 1. Someone gave me Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, and Christian McCaffrey for the 102. So,
wow. That's an all-in move. I like it. That's great.
Of course I'm going to do that. And I know an Eagles fan who's in the chat right now who is trying to trade me AJ Brown in another Dynasty league, Josh. So it does seem like Marvin's probably right there. AJ Brown is a trade target, even though I probably just killed my own trade. Austin, before you give your opinion, I do want to throw Josh up on the screen. Says there's really no difference between AJ Brown and Nico Collins. Brown is a year older, but does have a longer track record of success. And in this same draft, Nico Collins goes at the 2-9, almost 2 full rounds ahead of AJ Brown.
Yeah, I do think that like there's some overreaction happening here for how Philadelphia ran their offense at times, particularly down the stretch. Like they relied so heavily on Saquon Barkley and the quarterback run game that I think some people are like, oh, AJ Brown, he didn't really like hit his ceiling last year because of that. And I'm sure there's some people who that like when they think of AJ Brown, they imagine him on the sidelines reading a book, and like that makes him like, okay, well, I don't want to take that guy with my 2nd round pick. And I'm like, okay, it's still AJ Brown. I'm like very much with you that like he is very much worthy of a pick in the first 2 rounds of a Dynasty startup. I I mean, I wouldn't have been mad if he had gone before Malik Neighbors, frankly. Like, that's the air we were talking about him last year, where he was like a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. I traded for him in a league at the end of last year. I sent away Chris Olave, my first round pick, which ends up being the 110 in a 12-team league, and a 4th round pick for AJ Brown and Calvin Austin. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to smash that, because AJ Brown, like, I feel like I know what he's going to be over the next several years. And at this point, Chris Olave, I don't know what he's going to be over the next several years. So I agree. This is a really great value, especially for a team that already has CeeDee Lamb and Drake London on it. Like, a team's set at receiver for the next several years.
I'm going to go ahead and scroll the draft. We've had the first half of the draft up here long enough. Just so people can get an idea of what's going on at the bottom of the draft as well. We only go 15 rounds. Most dynasty startups are 20 to 25 rounds. We only go 15 because I don't let this show go more than an hour. But just know, if you're in your first ever dynasty startup, it's going to be a lot more rounds than this. This league, there's 10 starters. So we're drafting our 10 starters and only 5 of our bench players. And again, the draft kind of goes on in the background. I just try to ask interesting questions to these guys about what's going on in the draft. I feel like we still need to discuss the 2025 rookies, just because it was such a big draft with big names like Ashton Genty. I guess that was maybe not many big names. We're going to talk about Amari and Hampton, Marvin, because you drafted him. But then when we look like in this draft, Genty goes at the 2-1, Hampton goes at the 3-8. I feel like that's the right kind of gap. I feel like people thought Henderson and Judkins were a little bit closer to Hampton than what we're seeing in this draft right now, Marvin. Henderson falls to the 4-5, Judkins falls to the 5-6. Is that about right with landing spots? Obviously, you like what happened with Hampton. Are Henderson and Judkins values at that point, or are they about where they should be based on how everything shook out?
Yeah, I do think, especially Judkins here is a really, really good value, where he's going after guys like Kyron Williams, Jonathan Taylor. I mean, those are still proven running backs and probably safer running backs. But to me, those 3 guys, Hampton, Henderson, and Judkins, in my evaluation, were all really close. They were all in that 90th percentile range. They weren't quite as elite as Ashton Genty, but you could really interchange those guys in your rankings, and I would not argue against that, because I think the landing spots are solid, and from a production standpoint, from a draft capital standpoint, they all check a lot of those boxes. And so I do think those, we see this with startups. I think rookies end up being some of the better values in startup drafts. And Judkins, who is, 5 rounds in, gets drafted, I would not be shocked in a year from now if he's one of the guys that gets drafted in the first 2 rounds, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there in Cleveland. It's not a great offense, not a great team, but he'll get a bunch of opportunities, and he can carry the load, and we've seen that. And so I do think they're all great values. I shouldn't toot my own horn with the Marion Hampton pick, but I do think Judkins at that ADP is a great value, and Henderson as well. I think those guys, I wouldn't be shocked in a year from now when we're looking back and saying those guys are, easily top 10, if not top 5 for dynasty running backs.
Austin, it's a pretty big gap to the next set of rookie running backs. Caleb Johnson goes in the 8th round. RJ Harvey goes at the end of the 8th. And then Cam Scatabo goes at the 11th, a full 2 rounds after those guys. A lot of people touted this running back class as one of the deepest we've seen in ages, but it seems that once we saw their landing spots, some of them kind of fell out of favor. Now, RJ Harvey in rookie drafts has shot up, but clearly that did not carry over into this startup.
Yeah. Oh, and I think some of the thing with the running back class overall, and frankly, I wish I had said this like a month ago, but I've been thinking about it for a while. So you just have to trust me that this isn't like a hindsight bias thought. But one of the issues with this being such a deep running back draft class is there's still a lot of startable running backs in the NFL. And so like we're now getting very crowded running back rooms where it's less clear who the number 1 is going to be, or if we're just going to get even more running back committees than what we've had in the past. I think it's a little bit of like when we have really good receiver classes, it's like, well, receivers already a super deep position. Like I feel like we were already able to find really good, like, or not really good, but like solid running back options in late rounds. And so now you add in a bunch of really solid rookies on top of that. And people are like, I don't know, like, is Caleb Johnson going to beat out Jaylen Warren for the starting spot? who's to say? We won't know for sure until week 1. We're really highly speculating at this point. So I think there's like some of that is mixing with people betting against some of these teams that have been really bad. Like the Patriots were not a good offense last year. Cleveland, not a good offense last year. Pittsburgh, it's kind of like, are they really going to carry a solid running back? I think some of that is coming in. I mean, the Giants, like, I don't know where they're going to be the same. So like, there's a lot of running back prospects that I like that went to not great teams and potentially not great situations. But I think to Marv's point, that doesn't mean they're not a great value. I think they are great values. Like, I love being able to get Henderson, Judkins where they are. I wasn't super excited about Judkins before the draft. But with this landing spot, I'm like, actually, I feel pretty great about that and getting him in the 5th round here. I love that. And Caleb Johnson in the 8th round, like, I thought I might be able to get him later in that round. That would have been great. So I think for me, the lesson that I take away from this is that it's okay to wait on running back in general. Like, they're going to be optioned there later on. And so it's worth making sure you have 2 solid quarterbacks, get those elite receivers, and then figure out running back a little bit later on.
And along those same lines, Austin, the wide receivers seem to have went the other way. People seem to be liking them more. And I was wondering, is this dynasty rationalism finally coming back to light? Because we're always told to like wide receivers better than running backs because they last longer. And when you look, the way everyone loved the running backs in the draft, you would have expected them to go higher, but everybody kind of went in lockstep. TEP McMillan goes in the 4th round. Obviously, not everybody loves the rookie wide receiver, so it took him a little longer, but then Hunter goes just after him. You grab Egbuka. I noticed Jaden Higgins goes in round 10. Luther Burton goes round 9 just before Higgins. I'm sure I'm missing some of the other rookies in here, but then I noticed Trey Harris going in round 11, and I think that was the one that really caught my attention here. Trey Harris, who was a 2nd or 3rd round pick by the Chargers, is going 2 full rounds ahead of Keon Coleman, who was a late 1st, early 2nd round pick for the Bills last year. Like, we're really pumping up this Trey Harris guy, Austin, but in general, I think we're seeing in this startup a more rational dynasty mind around the wide receivers versus the running backs.
Yeah. And I think some of that too is, again, like, we have the known versus the unknown. Like Trey Harris, what we have is the excitement that we saw from him in college, and we're like, oh, this is a new guy. He's going to really show out. And Chargers, they needed another receiver, whereas Keon Coleman disappointed a ton of people last year. And so I think like that's a situation where it's actually flipping the opposite direction, where you have people that are like, well, I already saw Coleman. He's out of the league. Basically, I'm not going to draft him. I'm going to draft the new guy. And it's like, okay, well, traditionally, receivers, we waited for that 3rd-year breakout. So there's still room for Coleman to improve and really step into a more prominent role.
And I'll have you just chime in on the receivers in general, Marvin, before I pop a user question up on the screen. Are you a little surprised? I don't think anyone's surprised to see the top of the draft not start till the 4th round, but we're starting to see some of these guys who are going in the 3rd round of rookie drafts moving way up in this dynasty startup.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting. And to your point with receivers, I think what's interesting with wide receivers, and this kind of gets forgotten a little bit because we get so enamored by some of these rookies, and you think about Brian Thomas Jr., who's someone had a little later, and now he's one of the best dynasty wide receivers. But wide receivers have actually a significantly lower hit rate than running backs. Running backs are way easier to project. And you look at 1st round wide receivers, they only hit at a 50% rate. And that's only looking at a top 24 fantasy points per game season. The threshold isn't even a wide receiver 1 season. It's only 50% of them that hit. And for day 2 wide receivers, it's 33%. So it's pretty low. And running backs, round 1 running backs are like 90%, 80%, roughly in that. And day 2 guys, if you look at production, you can actually pick out the guys like a Trevion Henderson, Caleb Johnson, and those guys that produced in college. Those guys hit at like a 60, 70% rate. So you can actually trust running backs a little more. And so that's where I feel like it's good to see people wait on wide receivers here a little more, because I think there's a lot more uncertainty with them. Again, you have to also trust the quarterback situation. That's another variable you have to think about. Yeah. So it is interesting to kind of think about that in the context of a startup draft, but also in a rookie draft. Like, do you prioritize running backs because they're RJ Harvey, right? Who's in a
Yeah.
good situation. I'm not the biggest fan of him to begin with, but running backs are, you just give them opportunities and they produce for fantasy purposes. And so it's an interesting, I guess, dilemma that you have to think about, because wide receivers, well, when they do hit, they're in the league for
they
a long
last
time. Like,
forever.
imagine getting
That's so
exactly.
interesting.
But then to find and pick out the guy that hits of the 50%, like which of the how many do we have in the first round? The 3, like which of those 1 or 2 that's going to hit out of that group, or 4 actually with Golden. And as a Packer fan, I could talk about Golden for a while because I'm not the biggest fan of him, but that's just the thing, is like of those 4, only 2 are going to hit on average. And so it's a little more risky than running backs. And so that's where it does make for an interesting strategy as you approach these startups.
Yeah, I think another point on that like just builds on what you're saying of like day 2 running backs hitting more often than we would think. I feel like with this draft, because the running backs quote unquote fell, there might be a misconception that maybe they aren't as good as we thought that they were going to be because they fell to the day 2, day 3. Like there were running backs on day 3 that I was like, I'm excited about this landing spot for this guy.
Yeah.
But I think what's really happening there is that the NFL teams knew, like, we don't have to spend first round draft capital on these running backs. There's going to be plenty of guys that we can go to on day 2 and day 3. And so it's kind of like it's paradoxical with what we would think is what we would normally think with players who fall later in the NFL draft.
Perfect. Guys, I think that is going to bring us to me having you guys do your wrap up. No, I wanted to talk about tight ends because this was a tight end premium, and we didn't spend a ton of time talking about the tight end premium, but we talked about our thoughts. But one of the things I always notice whenever we call a draft tight end premium, and maybe this is just because it's not a real draft and there's not real projections, it tends to change nothing. So let me go ahead and get the draft where I can scroll it over on the screen here, guys. So we have 2 go in the first 2 rounds. Laporta goes in the 4th. That's our 3rd. Warren is 5. Hawkinson is 6. Kittle is 7. Loveland is 8. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. You know, everybody signs on to hear me count. 22 tight ends go out of 150 picks. 10 teams, that's 2 per team. I guess it's noteworthy that just about everybody got a backup, or we averaged out to everybody having a backup. Marvin, is this what you expect out of a tight end premium, or would you expect more tight ends to go early once the scoring accurately affected tight end premium?
Yeah, I was a little surprised. I thought they would go a little earlier. I kind of adjusted my strategy a little bit when I saw them drop. And I think what's interesting is, again, this is actually a decent tight end class as well, that you can kind of wait a little bit. And maybe that's what some were thinking here with Loveland being further down. And I think there's some guys that, again, with tight ends, unlike running backs and wide receivers where we see early breakouts, tight ends, that doesn't always happen. And so you could try to take that gamble a bit and grab a later round tight end, or I should say like the double digit rounds, and try to capitalize on that. And maybe that's what happened here. But I am surprised to see only 4 go in the first 5 rounds. I thought there might be a little more. And maybe that's partially because of the ADP and how that was structured. But
I mean, I'll throw Josh up on the screen.
A few more.
Josh did not even realize it was a tight end premium draft.
Yeah.
Austin, I liked Jamie's comment, and I'm going to throw up Hoov's comment as well. Jamie pointed out that he could have drafted Mason Taylor, Terrence Ferguson, Elijah Arroyo in the 15th round. All of these guys are guys he loves as late 2nd round, like rookie picks in tight end premium. And then Hoove brings up Jatavian Sanders didn't even get drafted. Theo Johnson didn't even get drafted. These were the guys we liked last year. So it seems like, again, this is probably more of an ADP and a drafters not being aware of the settings issue.
Yeah, I think there's probably something to that. Although I will say that in early best ball leagues, like the tight ends have dropped in general too. I've seen tight end ADP being lower than what we have seen in the past.
Well, I'm starting to do best ball right now, and I'll agree with you, but I'll also say it kind of is in lockstep with what we're seeing here. Bowers and Trey McBride, you better be ready to commit some early draft capital if you want to walk away with them. So
yeah, exactly. So it isn't as shocking to me, but it is definitely different than what we have seen in recent years in dynasty startups.
All right. Now we will get to the point where I was talking about. And Marvin, I'm going to go ahead and let you go first. What I tell folks here is you can talk about as many or as little of these players as you want. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. We are getting close to that 1 hour mark. I would like you to spend a little time on Amari and Hampton. I told you I'm getting over a thing where I don't know how to treat him in redraft, but that doesn't eliminate his value for me in Dynasty. I get that he is the back of the future. I just don't know if he's the back of 2025. But again, I'll let you explain it, but you could talk about as many or as few of these players as you want. If you had a strategy coming in, how the Superflex worked out for your quarterbacks, have at it.
Yeah, I can definitely start on Amari Hampton here. He's someone I'm just really excited about. I think about that offense being very run heavy and centered around an RB1, and maybe he's not the guy right out the gate, but I do think from a prospect standpoint, he was a guy that graded close to players like Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb in my evaluation, around Najee Harris, surprisingly too. So there's that. But he to me is the future of that backfield, and I'm kind of I knew that this would be a little more of a risky pick, and that's why towards the end I grabbed guys like Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones, who I could plug in as my RB1, RB2, and maybe help me out this year, because that may not happen. Hampton may not be the guy right out the gate.
Yeah.
What is interesting though is I maybe regretted a little bit waiting on wide receiver, but I do think there's still some upside there with Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, and then Luther Burden is just someone I really like, and took him there. But I do realize he may not be my flex guy to start this league.
Would this be your normal to walk out of a super flex with just 2 quarterbacks? Obviously, there would have been another 7 or so rounds where you could have tried to load up on some young guys, but there certainly probably wouldn't have been any starters left.
Yeah, that would not have been normal on my end. I probably waited a little too long there, and at some point I was just like, I'm just gonna load up on running backs and wide receivers. But there are a couple guys here, like Russell Wilson could be a decent QB3 to fill in for maybe a year. He's still on the board. And I'm looking down the board, and that might actually be it, pretty much.
That might be it. Yeah.
So I do. That is definitely a gap in my roster, and probably should have taken a QB3 here at some point.
Perfect. Not to call you out, but I just was like, wow. I'm the guy who loads up on quarterbacks. I give this piece of advice in any Superflex show I'm on. The great Scott Fish was on our show 4 years ago and said the cheapest quarterbacks will ever be is at your draft. So you better get them then.
100%. Yep.
All right, Austin, you know it by now. Go ahead. Starting off with the tight end after you being the guy who doesn't advocate starting a tight end.
Yeah. Well, when it's the rules, you got to play into those. So
I love that. Exactly.
I did go with Brock Bowers, but to our point earlier, the way that tight ends felt, I a little bit kind of wish I had gone differently and just seen like who I would have gotten later on, because like for example, Travis Kelce went in the 12th round. I know he is falling off, but I'm still not mad if Travis Kelce is my starting tight end at a Dynasty tight end premium league. So, it was good to get that experience and see what it was going to look like. And then I wanted to try the thing where you get 2 quarterbacks early. So I really focused on making sure that within the first 3 rounds, I got my 2 quarterbacks. So I had 2 solid guys to start, and I'm pretty happy with the guys that I got. But I will say, given how late like some of the quarterbacks went and how much it fell, I do wish I had waited also on that second quarterback. I think what I underestimated about this mock draft is that it's a 10-team league. And so because of that, fewer quarterbacks overall come off the board. And so I probably could have waited longer and still come away with a pretty solid QB2, especially because Caleb Williams, like I still believe in him. I think he was a great prospect, but truly, like, we don't really know if he's going to fully pan out yet. I think this year's going to be a big year for that. So it is a bit of a risky move to pick him and not have a solid third backup. Outside of that, I want to call out like Jonathan Taylor. Getting him in the 5th round feels like a really great value. I think he's still a really great running back, especially like if you're trying to do a win now strategy. It's one of the situations where these older running backs, they tend to fall, and they can help you win a Dynasty Startup League in year 1, which then just I think makes the experience that much fun. And if you're, in a paid league, it makes the return on investment that much more immediate. And then you get to start deciding whether or not to rebuild. Outside of that, I really waited on running backs. I only got 3 in 15 rounds, and I started to get nervous about that towards the end. I do think there are some like later guys that I would have been fine loading up on that didn't go in this draft, and they would have gone in later rounds. But only having 3 guys through 15 rounds, it's a little bit tighter. I think if I had gotten just one more running back by this point, I'd be feeling a little bit more comfortable with my running back situation. I feel like if we kept doing this draft, I would get in a situation where I feel like I had to like start reaching on running backs a little bit after this, so that could put me in a bad position later on in this draft. But overall, learned some lessons. Oh, I will say I almost took Colston Loveland where Jameson Williams got auto picked for me.
Okay.
So that is a spot where it would have been risky for somebody waiting on tight end, because I might have taken him as my second tight end there.
Was 2 QBs a concerted effort on your part? And if it was, I have a follow-up question.
It was not. It was a little bit. That 30-second clock was really quick while we were talking.
Yeah, I was to say I switched to 30 seconds because I want the draft to end. We were having shows last year where the draft would not end while we were still talking, and I hate when the show goes over an hour. I try to commit to an hour, and so 30 seconds. You got the pressure on our fake drafts here.
Yeah, but I think part of the reason I was comfortable with it and I kind of quit thinking about quarterback is because I had Mahomes and Caleb Williams. And
Okay.
I'm like, these are 2 guys I believe in. So I did there was some intention in not thinking about quarterback for a while.
I wanted to ask, and Marvin, I don't know if you're playing I don't know how many best ball drafts either one of you two have done, because Austin, you've been out of the country, but I was going to ask if the 2 quarterback thing was a little bit of best ball brain, because there comes a point during the summer where I have to remind myself I'm not doing best ball drafts anymore, that I'm doing redraft, and it's a very different strategy. And I think there's a lot of times where if you spend early draft capital on a position in best ball, you are hesitant to spend it later. So I didn't know if this was like a mental block for either one of you.
I don't think so for me. I think it was truly just like I took these guys early, so I don't need to take it later. I mean, if I was doing for best ball leagues right now, I'm kind of like waiting on quarterback in general, like waiting to like the 4th, 5th round at the earliest, unless I'm trying to do a very specific stack. But that one's very more dependent on the ADP.
Same thing.
Yeah,
for you.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I think part of it is too that I think there's a point in the draft where I look at some of the quarterbacks that are a little older, and I'm like, okay, I'd rather stock up on a different position that might have some younger players there, and guys that might have a little more value down the line. So thinking about like Geno Smith, Matthew Stafford towards the end, I thought about them a little towards that 11th round, 10th round, but at the same time, I don't believe in the long-term value for either one of them really, even though they have kind of stability with their contracts right now. But then, you get to a point where I only have 2 and then you're stuck with an option where you don't have that backup, and you might be trying to, start Daniel Jones in a buy situation, which would not be ideal.
I was trying to figure out how to get Tyler Shuck into the draft just for our buddy Hoove, who is a big Tyler Shuck guy. And he says, some people will tell you Shuck is the oldest QB in the league. I am some people. I have been hating on Tyler Shuck from day one, but I want to give Hoove his flowers. Hoove was on Shuck being one of the highest drafted quarterbacks in this draft, and he ended up being it was in the 2nd round, but he was not wrong about it. Marvin, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure. I feel like this was such an informative show. Thank you, but most importantly, let people know where they can find you, where they can find your work if you have anything going on right now.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. This was super fun. Anyone listening can find my work almost always on Twitter, X. It'll be there at ff_Marvin E. And working on a Dynasty series right now, looking at the range of outcomes for rookies. So that'll come out at some point here over the next couple of weeks. And it's still rookie season, so it's kind of fun. But there's going to be quite a bit of content coming over the next few months here for Dynasty. So thanks for having me, you guys.
Yeah, Austin, parting words for our friends.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Austin_FFL. But as Ryan will tell you, come join us in Discord. Love to hang out, talk about your best ball drafts and any dynasty trades you have going. And I'll be contributing to our at the Look Inside. That's what we call it. Our Look Inside series, which is coming up here over the summer. And be on the look for some best ball podcasts coming up.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's about time for best ball season. I noticed our best ball content is kind of popping off right now. So I went ahead and got my best ball rankings uploaded to the website. If you guys are looking for rankings, I'm sure Austin will join me soon enough. But right now mine are on there. So if you guys are looking for best ball rankings, you will find those on clubfantasyffl.com. We still have our rookie ranks up. I'm gonna leave those rookie ranks up through the month of May. We'll switch over to redraft come June, which kind of brings me to the schedule. I am taking next week off. It is my wife's birthday, so there will be no Mock It Like It's Hot next Friday. However, there will still be no pun intended coming up this week. We are going to do the sleeper quarterbacks when Mock It Like It's Hot is back. That's going to be a couple weeks from now. We are going to start looking at redraft and charity drafts. We are friends with a ton of the folks out there who run all of these wonderful charity leagues. We are going to invite some of them on to talk about their leagues, talk about how you can get involved in their leagues, and we're going to do mock drafts for those leagues for probably the entire month of June. Jamie says he won the draft. We don't grade drafts here, Jamie, so I'll take your word for it. Congratulations on your mock draft victory today. You're the first person to claim the win, so you get the win. For Austin, I'm Ryan. Wonderful, wonderful welcome, and thank you to Marvin. Always remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We'll see you at the next mock draft, which is going to be in 2 weeks. Have a great night.